Now, all of a sudden, everybody's paying attention to this.
Yeah.
And so I had somebody come into the office last week. Probably he was a wholesaler. And he came in from, pretty large asset manager. And he was like, hey, guys, I've got a hot tip. Y'all need to start marketing toward women. And he has this whole thing where his company's got all these great tools and resources that I can utilize to attract female clients. And I was just like, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you, sir. I will take that under advisement. So there's a whole world of these 90% of financial advisor men out there being like, the women. Oh, we gotta go after the women now. This is such a brilliant idea.
Hello, and welcome to the Women Who Roar podcast. It's female leaders talking about crushing work, money, and life. I'm Sarah Walter.
Hi, I'm Shreya Chaubey.
And I'm Jess Jackson.
And our guest today, we have Kristin Merrick, who I'm very excited to introduce you to. So Kristin worked her way up in the world of foreign exchange and emerging markets and eventually became a vice president at Morgan Stanley. She has over 20 years of investment experience and now works as a financial advisor at her family-run firm, O'Keefe Financial Partners. She's passionate about educating female entrepreneurs and execs on financial strategies and contributes to many publications like Forbes, CNBC, New York Magazine, InStyle, Parents Magazine, Girl Boss, just to name a few. There are more. And is a frequent guest on The Today Show, the NBC Nightly News, and Yahoo Finance. She was also recently named as 2020 Badass 50 by InStyle magazine. And a firm believer in financial literacy for all and an advocate for destroying the pay gap, she also co-founded the networking group Women Work Fcking Hard. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you. That's a very impressive intro. Did I do all that?
You did. And so I think just to kick things off, we'll start sort of at the beginning more so of your professional career. Shreya and I both have had similar experiences, but I think not to date you, but you even started before us. Mm-hmm. What was it like being a woman on the trading floor when you started?
So my career started in 2001, which was an interesting time because it was September 11th. I started my actual job at Bank of America in August of 2001. And so I was on the desk for about, 5 weeks. And it was, I just truly did not understand anything about life in general at that stage in my life. So then you compound being on a trading floor and then 9/11. Just a really weird time. I lived through obviously the financial crisis. That was a little bit before your time.
The year before I started.
That was a bit before your time. The financial crisis was a very strange time because it was the first. The world almost ended. So that was a really weird thing to watch and witness, especially from a place of not it was the first time I really understood the word liquidity. Or the lack thereof.
Yep.
There's just not a price. There's just no one who wants to buy this. There's just no one out there. There's no bid. And so that was a really interesting learning experience.
Sarah and I talk about this often in terms of the impact of the crisis in sort of a PTSD that it leaves on you as an investor. And managing your own money in the period right after the crisis, but also over the long term, right? A lot of studies have been done around people in general, but women who have come out as a generation of investors after the crisis. And now I think that's a really great segue into maybe talking a little bit about the work you do now and maybe the impact of all of this that you can perhaps feel in the clients that you speak to.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I obviously have transitioned from the institutional world of currencies, and now I'm an advisor, and most of my clients are women. So that is an interesting part of the conversations I have are very interesting. There's people who I advise who were around for that, and then there's a lot of people I advise who weren't investing in 2008. And by the way, there's a lot of people I advise who weren't even investing 5 years ago. right? And so the interesting thing about that dynamic is that I'm advising people who have actually never sustained real losses.
Right.
Ever. And so for the first time in like their investing lives, they're seeing
The market
red.
doesn't always go up.
The market doesn't always go up. We're actually living that. No.
The market goes down.
And it's really been a dynamic conversation. I got a call a few weeks ago from a woman who, by the way, had been giving me the hard sell on all of these completely esoteric cryptocurrencies in December. I had to buy Solana. I had to buy Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. I had to buy all of the weird cryptocurrencies. She was giving me like a real pitch. And she sent like a panicked email about 2 weeks ago, basically saying that she didn't understand why her stock portfolio was down as much as it was. And I was like, girlfriend.
You're in a higher risk situation.
High
volatility.
You're talking to me about buying Solana and you are upset because your growth ETF is down. So I think we need to talk about risk in general here because I think you're missing the mark here. I think you're maybe miscalculating what your risk buckets look like.
So I guess question for you on that. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Go for it.
So I think the narrative out there is that women are inherently have a lower risk tolerance than men do, right? And so you come out and like as an investor, you're like, okay, I'm gonna like construct my portfolio this way or have advice to do that and then not putting everything into like high growth stocks or what have you. How do you, I guess, with your client demographic, like how do you balance that?
Yeah. So there's like the stereotype, I should say. There's the stereotype and there's the data that supports the stereotype that women don't take enough risk, right? And that's, we can go and look. There's a million studies done that prove this, right? And it really does impact women's wealth over time. So let's just all acknowledge that we all agree that exists and we know it and we don't need to talk about that. However, there are women out there who love risk and who are risk seeking. Exactly. Like, and by the way, I imagine all of us in this room are people probably in that world where we've all worked or work in finance in some capacity. I think that's probably the exception. People who work in different types of industries have probably more risk seeking than others. And so all of those women aside, I think what I have to do a lot of times is I actually just have to show them how numbers work, how compound interest works, right? So I talk about compound interest a lot. And, compound interest is middle school math, right? It's basic math. We all know that it's just adding interest to principal over and over and over again. But what I'll do is I take my little compound interest calculator and I show them, here's your $5,000 a year that you're going to put in your IRA. And then this is your rate of return, 6%, 8%, and 10%. And then we're going to give it a 30-year run. And this is the difference between your 6% of return, your 8% return, and your 10% return. And the numbers are so insanely different between a 6% and an 8% and a 10% return that their minds are blown. And they're like, well, clearly I want the 10% return. Get me the 10% return, Kristin. And I'm like, great. Well, we have to take more risk. And you can take calculated risk and you can be thoughtful about that. You don't have to buy Solana and all the crazy cryptos out there. You can just have a nice little lovely diversified portfolio and still achieve that. But you have to do it in a smart way and you have to make sure that you're not, you don't have like treasury bonds in your IRA at the age of 25, right? No 25-year-old should have treasury bonds in their IRA. Like that is just a bad path. So that's the difference between sitting down individually with a client for me to be able to like show them on a screen how money works. And like my frustration is I want to tell everyone, right? I want to like yell at people on the street about compound interest.
So do you talk to women about risk taking in other aspects of their life that oftentimes if they, change jobs, and we can talk about that as a generational phenomenon of millennials changing jobs often and what that can yield over the course of a long career. But taking risks with retooling, reskilling, asking for more pay.
Yep.
And maybe that's a segue to talk about pay and gaps there too. But how do you talk about risk as a holistic thing in the conversations you have? Because there are many ways to sort of manifest
I think that's
that.
right. I think it's a really, really important point, because risk is not just investment risk. It's all about just kind of daily calculations of risk, right? I mean, it's anything, right? Do I take the subway or do I walk? Now, we don't think about that as a risk calculation, but it certainly is, right? So, when you're, do I stay in this very comfortable job that probably is underpaying me, or do I maybe go to the startup that is not a sure thing? That is a very real conversation that I have all the time. I think what I do with my clients and maybe differentiates me from most advisors is that I really like to be really like in the muck with my clients on a day-to-day about this kind of thing. I really want to be involved in their lives. And if that means like helping them refinance their mortgage, or if that means helping them with their comp package, it doesn't really matter to me. I just want to make sure I'm involved in all of their decision-making, then great. I've noticed some trends with women. One of the things is I do think women have a tendency to stay in the safer job for too long. I think that means, as a general rule, they get underpaid at these jobs for a longer time, and therefore they're not making as much money over time. They're not saving as much money over time. They're not putting enough money in retirement over time, and so on and so forth. I think that's a problem.
So, question for you on that.
Yeah.
So, one of the guests we had on this show made that same point, and she said she literally had to leave her job and change the variation of her name and sort of start over as a new person to kind of feel her worth in all ways that manifests itself. What are some, what are the things that from you, what have you seen, I guess, from a thematic perspective that have held women back? Why do women stay in a job for too long?
Well, I think one of the things that I felt, this is my own personal experience from being in the career path that I was in for so long, I did that 15 years, whatever it was that I think that the banks did a very good job of making me think that I didn't have the ability to do anything else. And I don't know, this is it's not like some evil man is sitting in an office somewhere trying to make me think this, but I do just think it's cultural. And I think that there is a thing that happens that culturally from top down is well, you're pretty lucky to have this seat.
Yeah.
You should thank your lucky stars that we have you here every day and we pay you what we pay you, and you should go home and be thankful. I think that is part of it. I think part of it too is if you have maybe a family or you support other people in your lives and you're able to quote unquote make it work, taking a different job can be really scary because you're well, what if that throws everything into chaos, and all of a sudden my childcare situation gets screwed up, or I can't work from home as much as I want to. I think there's just a lot of different things that women factor into moving jobs and create and seeking out opportunities. And then there's the obvious one, which is the imposter syndrome.
We talked about this before too.
This came up.
I never do this job. Look, there's one thing on the resume that says that I must be able to hula hoop, and I cannot hula hoop.
Do you think that in terms of having a family, I know that that's a theme that comes up a lot, right? When people talk about the gender pay gap or, where women get their imposter syndrome from and all of that kind of stuff. Are men not faced with the same pressure, with the same ideas of, you should be lucky to have this seat? Is it more that the messaging is different to women, or is it that we internalize it differently to men?
God, that's such a hard question.
I'll pipe in.
Where'd you come up with that?
I think it's both. My brother and I have had sort of very similar career trajectories. He's 3 years younger than me. And we constantly would talk about, we call imposter syndrome, the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
And especially when we started at Morgan Stanley and then both of us switched into new roles there, of just you feel like you're surrounded by really smart people, and even though you've at least feel like you've done a pretty good job navigating yourself through life, where did all these other insanely smart people come from, and when are they going to realize that I don't belong here? So I think just using my brother as an example, like I think men do internalize it. But I think women eventually just take a lot more things into account. And I think for men, because they're not like maybe necessarily having the child or any of those things, like they can, in their minds at least, afford to take that risk and are less afraid to ask. And I also think part of that is the precedent that's been set. Mm-hmm. So if a man goes into a salary conversation or a bonus conversation or whatever and says like, you paid me this last year, I think I deserve this, or I'm walking away, that's sort of accepted behavior, then it's expected that that will happen. If a woman does the same thing, it's like, well, why are you not loyal to us? Like you're sort of putting everything into question. And I distinctly remember having a conversation with my bosses at the time saying like, basically, I think this is kind of unfair. And their comeback was, well, this other guy, like he just bought a house and he has to afford his family.
So?
And it was kind of like, and then the other response was like, well, no one does that anymore. And I was like, well, I have 4 examples of people who just literally asked for more money or said they were walking away. And not only did you give them more money, you promoted them. So like, I also think there's like this, we're going to make you, I don't know, is there a way to like gaslight people in work? Like,
yes, that's exactly what that is.
I don't know how to say it, but, and that was my personal experience. I don't know if that's universal, but to me, it's just, there is like these deeply embedded like expectations of what I think men and women like will do or ask for.
So controversial question then, right? Like, are we potentially hurting women by constantly having the conversation about imposter syndrome? Like, are we revalidating the stereotype?
Yeah.
You know, are we kind of re-cementing that?
I don't know that I agree with that. I think that recognizing sometimes that we're having these doubts and self-doubt is something that we need to do. We need to say to ourselves, like, hey, this is kind of silly. Like, you should not be going down this road. Like, you're great. You're great. You're smart. You're good at what you do. People like you. You need to stop this. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's an important thing to recognize sometimes what silly path you've taken. And I think it's important to like, I think where the danger of it is when you don't realize it and it becomes a really
It becomes fact.
It becomes fact, or it just becomes a huge hurdle for you, and you just can't get out of your own way, and I can't possibly apply for that job, or this is too much for me, or things like that. That's where I think it becomes a problem. I don't know that talking about it is such a bad thing. I know what you're saying, but I don't know that I agree.
Do you feel that corporations and the workplace should be supporting women, especially around areas where the funnel drop-off is pronounced?
Yeah.
Obviously around, the time women have children, and how do you think that corporations can step up and provide
so this
support?
is a bit of one of my rabbit holes.
Yeah. Good. Let's go down it.
So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to use the banks as kind of my example, because I feel like first of all, they're probably one of the more glaring, obvious examples of pay gaps, and I don't necessarily. I think they struggle with how to fix it. I think they are fully aware of it. I don't think there's some evil man in an office somewhere trying to underpay women. I just think that they can't get out of their own way and figure out how to fix this problem, right? So, Sarah was in an analyst class in 2009 with, let's just call it 50 kids, and it was 25 girls and 25 boys right out of college. And
the numbers are almost at big banks, like it's almost 55. It's 55% women, 45%
They do a decent job of trying to recruit.
The top of funnel is very good, right?
Yeah, they do a pretty decent job of trying to recruit out of college, which is not the easiest challenge, because business schools are generally skewed more towards men. Right. So they actually go out of their way, I think, doing a pretty good job of recruiting. So I think in that particular, like right out of college, they've recruited pretty well. Yeah. And then what happens is you take these 22-year-olds and you just throw them into an environment which no 22-year-old is equipped to handle. And there is no training on, by the way, there's training on like derivatives, but there's no training on like someone touching your butt. Right? So like, you're like, okay, so my butt just got touched and I don't know who to tell. I probably shouldn't tell anyone. Okay, I won't tell anyone. And then like that happens. And then like, you know, a couple weeks later, you know, somebody yells at you and you cry in the bathroom. And then like a couple of weeks later, like somebody else touched your butt. And it's just like all these weird things are happening. And you're just like, and then you're like out drinking martinis and you're showing up with a hangover and then everyone's screaming. It's just like a weird job for a 22-year-old, okay? And so you're either in it and you either figure out how to adapt and you figure out if you like it or you don't. And generally speaking, and this is a massive, massive stereotype, but generally speaking, the men have a better job of adapting to this environment because it is a male-dominated environment. Because guess why? There are more men on the trading floor, and the men who are on the trading floor have a tendency to be very alpha, very macho, very kind of, you know, who played lacrosse and who played football and who played. So it's a very kind of already.
And it sounds like they're sexual predators also.
Yeah, there's a few.
Gotten better over time.
It has gotten better over time.
But definitely still happens.
So there's a few. And so what happens is you have to be able to, as a woman, you have to be able to adapt. And so right off the bat, you lose, well, I don't know. You probably
some
lose
portion,
10% in the first year, right?
On the first year.
10% in the first year is gone. You maybe by the time the analyst program is done, you've lost 25%. Somebody moves here, somebody takes another job here. And then by the time you're 5 or 6 years out, most of your analyst class is diaspora. But the real danger zone comes when women start having babies.
Exactly.
And this is the real danger zone, because if you've been able to keep a woman for that long in the seat, then like you've gotten past the weirdness. She's used to the environment. She's used to the job. She knows what the job is. She knows what she's signing up for. She's in it. So the hard part's done. But now she's going to have a baby, and she's going to have to take care. First, she's going to have to grow a human in her body, and then she's going to have to take care of that human when it comes out. And actually, like, that's a big thing to do. Like, you can't just like have it and then like leave it. You have to like,
I mean, you can, but certain people will have something to say about it.
You have to like rock it and feed it.
And to interject here, like
burping.
And again, like times have probably changed a little bit, right, for the better.
You still have to feed them. Is that what you're saying?
No, you still have to feed them. But when you have the baby, you take a certain amount of time off. If your male equivalent has a baby, I never saw a guy take more than a week of paternity leave.
Right.
And for all different reasons, right?
But that's changing too.
Which is what I'm saying is changing
normalizing
much for the better.
Yes.
But at the time, it was a week of paternity leave. Now maybe we get to a month, what have you. However, the woman is still off for significantly longer than the man. And while it's illegal to not have your job when you get back, your actual job usually doesn't in certain environments.
When you come back, everything's a mess. Your body's a mess. Your mind's a mess. You miss your baby. You come back. Everybody sucks. The job sucks.
And now you're sitting next to the secretary.
Yeah, exactly. And you're just like,
because they did a seat move while you're out.
And then you have to go pump in the closet next to the copy machine room. There's people like banging on the door while you're pumping. I mean, the whole thing is just chaos. And so you start really questioning whether or not this is for you.
Did you lose any clients when you came back?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh my God, yes. Like, by the way, I came back to a reorg.
Yeah.
How
you had
convenient.
it was really bad.
I came back to a reorg. And so like everything, I mean, literally I lost like it was a mess. It was just like a crazy mess. So I just was like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, just like, I'll just take whatever you guys give me. And I just like,
But just to explain to our listeners, your comp is based on your P&L.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So clients getting taken away is a very methodical way to calculate
Yes.
how much
So basically it was
your
like,
salary will go down. Or your
hey
bonus.
girl, welcome back. We love you so much. Oh, by the way, you you've lost these clients, but we gave you this one. And good luck. And I was like, oh, okay.
What, like, from, like, without obviously using hard numbers, more like in the percentage vicinity, How much of your personal comp do you think, like in terms of your salary, how much did that affect you?
So the salary stays, the salary is
The
fixed.
bonus.
But your bonus
total
is
comp.
your total comp. And you, usually the way they structure it is you get paid as a certain like percentage of, it's a payout based on your percentage of your P&L.
And it's all discretionary, which
And
is
it's
cute.
entirely,
Great.
exactly.
We love that. We love discretionary figures.
So cute.
So if you were if you had a bonus that was say 100% of your comp and you lost your 2 biggest clients, your bonus is now like 50% of your comp.
No, it's
Like
huge.
it's a huge swing.
But again, it's all discretionary, so none of it actually matters, right? They could just pay you whatever they want to pay you. You can have the biggest year, you can have a small year, they can just pay you whatever they want to pay you. And that's kind of what was happening.
My first child was actually while I've been at FinTech Collective, and VC, at least to me, is very different than being at a big bank. I had a very positive experience with maternity leave. I would say while I was at Morgan Stanley, though, it was definitely during a lot of my prime childbearing years, and I actually chose to put off having children for fear of derailing my career. Definitely someone who's focused on career and all those things, like so many women are. And I wouldn't say I regret anything in life, but I look back at that and think that was stupid. I should have just done it. But I actively chose not to because I was worried about what things would look like when I came back. And I sort of had the vantage point of being the person that when someone went on maternity leave, covering for their clients, and then seeing what happened and like just not really wanting to be a part of that either, but knowing that being on the other side of actually going out and coming back to that was scarier. So I guess would love kind of to hear your all experience, because I know that the women who left were very nervous about leaving. And while you're trying to focus on your baby during those first couple months, like it's definitely in the back of your head.
Yeah, and my experience was being a founder with my youngest, right? And basically having a baby while we're closing a deal, right? And you know, it's an 8-week maternity leave. And at the stage of the company that we were at, you know, we didn't have great benefits. And oftentimes where I was in the position of hiring women who might be in their childbearing ages wasn't able to really, you know, offer those benefits, right? And so I came back, you know, almost, I think it was at the point like 7 days after giving birth to do a pitch. And no one really asked me to do it, but when it's your own company and you're in that stakeholder seat, you make decisions that are basically best for you and your career. And so no one forced me to do it, but I did it. But the reality is, you know, there are many women who are business owners and are in the driving seat having to make decisions. So, Chris, what was the anxiety level going back from maternity into the workplace? What were your fears, you know, that you were facing at that time?
I'm going to have an honest moment and say that by the time I had my first, I kind of knew my path was probably coming to an end in that world. And so I knew I was probably going to go back after my first, and because we weren't quite ready to just like leave. I wasn't ready to retire and do something different. But I kind of was just like, you know what, Kristin, just do it. Like, just rip off the Band-Aid, get back to work, figure it out, have your second kid, and then you can just be out, right? And that's like, but the anxiety of like leaving your baby is just awful. I mean, it's just really, really awful. But you have to, it is so much the Band-Aid analogy. You just have to do it. And then once you do it, it kind of feels great because you're like putting on clothes and you're going on the subway and you're like going for a glass of wine. And then you're like, oh, and you're like, you kind of start to feel a little bit more human again. And there is really something I think like therapeutic about that, going back to work, that I think really helped me like get back into like the swing of things.
It's really interesting. Like all three of you have a very different perspective on that, right? So you've all had children while in the workforce. Sarah's concern is, will my job still be there? Will it look the same when I come back?
Was. to clarify.
Which is
Not
a great
anymore.
news story.
But I can agree that the anxiety from coming back and the whole pumping thing is awful.
Right. But it's like, on one hand, it's like, will my job still be there? On another, it's, if I don't do this now, will my company exist?
Right.
Yes,
Right.
it's existential
Like,
risk.
will I be able to do this? And on the other hand, this is a great opportunity for me to just get the fuck out of here.
Oh, yeah.
So it's really interesting to me that like all three of you have like kind of similar shared backgrounds, but really different take on that.
And one experience that I think we're missing on the table is the mother that is a stay-at-home mom.
Right.
And goes through a whole set of other challenges, right? Which is going through that whole postnatal period with sometimes no help, right? And just expected to run the household, have this new individual human in the house and basically deal with it all with no breaks.
Yeah.
And then literally, that literally is thankless work, right? So yeah, I mean, I think everyone has unique experiences. The question in my mind is always the support system, right? In the individual environments, whether it's you in the home with your partner, with your extended family, your tribe, right? Or if you're in the workplace, who was your tribe in the workplace? Who did you go and talk and share these experiences with, right? And were women in your peer group perhaps having similar experiences that could really provide the support that we each needed? And
So one of the things we haven't covered yet is the platform that you started called Women Work Fucking Hard. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and what was the impetus behind that?
Yes. So I co-founded it with my best friend, Lindsay Shookus. Lindsay is a producer for Saturday Night Live. She's won like 20,000 Emmys, but I'm not bragging. And she and I love to throw parties, and we've been throwing parties since we were 22, living in the city. And it started as a party. It started as kind of a joke. We were not a joke, but we were throwing a party because we were trying to help this one woman who was starting a business. She was like a single mom. She's an esthetician, and she was trying to get more clients. And Lynn just loved her so much. She was like, let's get all of our like cool, wealthy friends in New York City to come to the apartment and have like Lily come and do our skin, and then everyone will hire Lily. And I was like, all right, Lynn. She's like, and then we'll call it Women Work Fucking Hard, because we were just like tired at this point. We had like little kids and we were working so much. And I was like, done. And so we put together this crazy network of women.
Why wasn't I invited?
I don't know, Sarah. I don't even remember what I was doing that
Why
night.
wasn't I invited? We didn't even know each other then, but very
I don't know. I don't know.
because you both have great skins.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Good save,
Thank you. Good one. So we threw this party. I put together this crazy good gift bag. And so all these women just showed up and were like, what is this party? And we were like, we don't know. We just like, it's tequila and there's skincare and there's a gift bag. And so all of a sudden we were like, what have we just done? What have we created? So we did the next year. And it was more women. It was a better gift bag. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, you have to keep doing this. So we started to like make it a thing. The goal really is to bring women together. And what's so cool about our networks is that I can, I bring in like finance people and entrepreneurs and, lawyers and things like that. And she brings in like, people in entertainment and in her whole world. And we mix all these women together. And then we bring in all these founders who are trying to grow their businesses. And we basically force everyone to hang out. We don't let anyone bring a guest. We don't let anyone bring their phones. And we give everyone a lot of tequila. And then we just make everybody like have the best night of their lives. And then afterwards, we basically are like, we try to connect everyone to what they need. Who needs a resource? Who needs a publicist? Who needs capital? Who needs this? Who needs that? And so during COVID, we started doing a lot of different salons. We were doing these virtual salons. We were just, the idea of like getting as much information out. So we did a whole salon on cannabis. We did because I love cannabis, in case everybody was wondering. I'm a cannabis mom. And we did one on this horrible situation going on in Texas with abortion. We did one, we just try to like elevate, as much as we can. We did this whole Mother's Day guide, again, trying to like, during like deep, dark COVID, we were trying to like, who are these founders that are just desperately needing some eyeballs? So we created this Mother's Day guide. InStyle ran it. InStyle's been very kind to us. So a lot of this just different kind of, we have the ability to get people to kind of rally for us and pay attention, and there's power in that, right? There's power in your network, and when you can really go to your network and say, hey, like, this is what we need you to do, this is where we need you to help us, and really bring your resources to the table, it just feels really good. So we're combining our favorite things, we're bringing people together, we're connecting, we're both hyper connectors, and we're really just trying to help as many women as we can in whatever capacity that they need.
So you know what's interesting, what you said about the virtual angle? Because I think it is a more, at least the optimist in me seems to think it's a much better environment in general for women's careers post-COVID.
Yeah.
Because so much of those resources or that advice or that network has gone online now.
Yeah.
And meeting in virtual settings where potentially in a prior world where we may have been constrained with the structural issues that we described and us being caregivers and whatnot, can now just log on and hear it all and be part of that community.
It's so great.
Right?
Everything is so much more accessible and flexible.
So cool.
And flexible. So,
really
over
cool.
time, I think if we look forward here, I'm pretty positive about how this thing is going to evolve, for especially with platforms like yours. So
I
awesome
know,
job.
and I think that was part of the part that the salon series that we did has been so fun, because it's like a little party, and so we kind of were able to kind of keep the party going, even though nobody could go to a party. So
I feel like that's something that's not talked about all that often, is the positive outcomes of COVID. Like,
right.
COVID sucks, don't get me wrong.
Totally,
the whole thing has been a shit show. But I do think that there have been a number of, shifts, whether it be, the accessibility that we were just talking about, because things are now online, which obviously helps women for the reasons that we've said. There's also, education is more accessible.
Yes.
I think we have a stat about that. You read an article recently?
we were all reading the article around the dropout rates of actually men post-COVID, and even looking at kind of top of funnel, it's something like 7 times fewer enrollments by men going to college, right? And these are kind of data points right now at a point in time, which are really going to manifest themselves in the workplace, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the line. And so when I'm looking at that, I'm just thinking, wow, women are completing college at a higher rate, are more in STEM subjects at a higher rate. They're probably going to be entering the workforce in larger numbers compared to men. And then even if you apply that funnel all the way down to kind of leadership, or all the way up to leadership positions, hopefully, fingers crossed, some of that, disparity that we see is going to get corrected. And what that means for you, Kris, is your clients
transfer well. Transfer
exactly.
well.
And they're also, these women too are joining companies that inherently have more flexibility than they did before.
Right,
so like, even making this like super personal again, like, because of COVID, this is seeing a bright spot in it. It is now understood that you can be just as productive at home as you are in the office. So if you're working from home, it's not like, oh, she's taking a day off. It's you're working from home. And so as a new mom, especially, being able to leave at a certain time to get home to see my daughter before she goes to bed, and not worrying in the back of my head, are people questioning my work ethic, because as soon as she goes to bed, I have another, couple hours to do work if I need to. Just from like a anxiety perspective, a peace of mind perspective, of feeling like you're adding value to your company, like all of those things, I am very, very thankful that is one of the positives that have come out of COVID.
Yeah,
For sure.
But just to kind of touch on something you just said, McKinsey's done a study that by 2030, it might be 2031, but by 2030, the majority of wealth, so to speak, and I'm using like air quotes when I say wealth, in the US will be predominantly managed by women.
Why is that?
It has to do with like boomers, women living longer than men. So there's that. That's part of it. It has to do with women taking more ownership of their money. It has to do with, there's just like transfers of wealth in terms of inheritances and things like that. This is their study. And so it's really funny because, obviously all my clients are, not all, but most of my clients are women. And so, I've just always, I'm just like my thing. I'm a woman, like my clients are women, it kind of makes sense. But there's like 90% of financial advisors out there are men. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's paying attention to this.
Yeah.
And so I had somebody come into the office last week, probably he was a wholesaler, and he came in from, pretty large asset manager, and he was like, hey guys, I've got a hot tip. Y'all need to start marketing toward women. And he has this whole thing where his, his company's got all these great tools and resources that I can utilize to attract female clients. And I was just like, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you, sir. I will take that under advisement. So like, there's like a whole world of these 90% of financial advisor men out there being like, the women. Oh, we got to go after the women now. This is such a brilliant idea. It just kind of made me giggle.
So this brings us to our final segment, Ask the Experts. We all know there's a lot of career and financial advice out there, but we wanted to engage in the conversation with women as women. So today's question comes from Twitter user Gabby Mangano. Her question is, I'm getting married soon and I have a lot of questions about joint finances, but I'm concerned about bringing up the idea of a prenup with my partner. What should I do?
I like this. There's a lot to unpack here. Okay, so what I've been thinking for a while now, probably the last year, is that the entire idea of the prenup needs just a rebrand. Like it's what we've thought about and how we've learned about prenups is just kind of old and antiquated, and most of the information that we've learned about prenups comes from like Us Weekly.
Right.
Right? Truly. It's
There's
like
a huge stigma attached to that.
Right.
And what getting a prenup implies.
Right. It always comes from a place of negative, like we're inevitably going to get a divorce, and I would never want him to have half of my money. That is not what it is designed to do. And the interesting thing about where we are in the state of the world is that we're getting married later, right? My parents got married when they were 21, right? They had no wealth. There was no wealth, okay? But people are getting married later now, and so they are accumulating, whether that's debt or wealth or both. And so they're going into a marriage with assets, businesses, homes, sometimes children.
Debt.
Right? Debt. And so you need to be thoughtful about what you're going into this marriage with. And it's really important to think about that for a lot of different reasons. First of all, if you are entering into a second marriage and you have, especially if you have kids, a prenup is like an absolute must. Like no question, right? Because what you then have to think about is you have to be protecting your assets for your children.
Right.
That's a really, really important thing to think about. So that's like right off the bat. If this is your second marriage, especially if you have kids, 100% you have to do it. If you own a home, if you own a business, oh my God, if you own a business, if you don't get a prenup and you own a business, shame. Shame, shame, shame. So there's just a lot that you need to think about when you're heading into this. Even if you don't have a ton of wealth and a ton of things, you still want to be thoughtful about that process. Marriage, I always say marriage is a merger. And so when you are merging your lives together, it's not just because you love each other so much and everything is wonderful and hugs, but it's also you're bringing your two entities together, and that brings the good, the bad, and the ugly. So if you have debt, you're basically accumulating each other's debt. it's, the other thing about the way that the law views your assets is that you can have assets from before you were married, separate. And if you bring them into the marriage, technically they're your assets still. But as soon as you commingle those assets, they are now joint assets. So for instance, if you come into a marriage with, $10,000 in your checking account, and then you add your spouse onto that account, boom, that $10,000 is now rightfully his. Okay, so that is the commingling of assets. And so I always am very clear with people on that. If you have a home that you own and you decide to add your spouse to the title of the house, boom, that's his. So this is where things can get really complicated. And you want to be really thoughtful about protecting those assets on the way in. And the debt piece is really can be really overwhelming. So what I always say is before you get married, everything should be out on the table. You should know what each other has, especially on the debt side. I have a few anecdotes of really scary, ugly situations of, I had a buddy one time who was like this close to getting married, and he found out that his fiance had like hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that he just didn't know about. I mean, and right before they got married, he called it off because of this. And he was like, well, I didn't dump her because of the debt. I dumped her because she lied to me about the debt. Right. And so that's a really interesting point. Like you want to be open and honest with each other about what you have going in, and you want to have a strategy of like how you're going to pay that and how you're going to work through that debt. And then also whose assets are going to stay whose, right? And a lot of people want to keep their assets separate. And by the way, that's fine. Like, I'm not judging that at all. I have plenty of clients who keep their assets completely separate. It's just something that you really want to be very thoughtful about going into marriage. You want to have open conversations. The thing about a prenup, and this is what freaks everybody out, is that you each need to have your own lawyer, right? So there's each person getting their own lawyer, each person having to pay a lawyer, and this is what stymies everyone. It's like, oh my God, we have to get lawyers involved, and we got to pay the fees, and blah, blah, blah.
Well, it turns into, it's a little bit of a like me versus him kind of thing, right? It perpetuates that stigma of we're preparing for the worst as opposed to going into our marriage optimistic. Like it's planting this. People think it's planting the seed.
It's planting the seed of inevitable failure, but really what you're just doing is you're just being thoughtful about and protecting what is yours.
Something that a lot of people associate a prenup with is people at a particular level of wealth. Prenups are for the wealthy. Is that how people should approach it, or prenups for everyone and a protection tool for everyone?
I don't think so. I mean, I have a client who would not probably consider herself wealthy, but she owns her own apartment, and has accumulated a pretty sizable amount of investments and retirement. And I think she just wanted to make sure that it was very clearly delineated that home was hers. That was her apartment. That was her retirement assets. That was her cash. I don't think that wealth needs to be a part of the conversation. It's more just about protecting what is yours.
Right.
And I think that's an important part of it's the most important part of this. And each state has their own laws. So this is the other complication of this. You had mentioned, if you're talking about a postnup, postnups don't always hold up in different states. So you have to have the right facts about different states and different laws and things like that. So it does get a little bit, it can get a little tricky.
Interestingly, about the lawyer piece, what we were talking about, we've got lawyers involved, it seems like it's me versus you. I actually think that's the opposite. And it's kind of similar to my view on therapy about having like an independent third party that's in your corner. Now it's not me versus you because we're okay. We're fine. We've outsourced this conflict to somebody else who's paid to do that. And they have no dog in this fight, no emotional dog in this fight, right? Like they're just there to negotiate the right outcome, objectively. And we can still continue to have our relationship and it's not then up for us to fight about.
Right.
So I think it's really interesting, at least from my perspective, that there even is a stigma about prenups. I'm like, how did we get here and not on the other side, which is of course I would, because I love this person. I want to make sure that I don't add unnecessary BS to our relationship.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I have a friend who's a divorce attorney, and she always says, a prenup, it does not exist to be punitive. So it's not created so that in the event of divorce, the spouse with less gets nothing. Right? It's not designed to be that way. It's designed to be fair and to be protective of what you've brought into the marriage. So it's not to say that during the time that you're married and the money that you made together during that time is not going to be distributed in a fair way upon divorce. It's really about protecting what you brought into the marriage. So that's also something else to think and to keep in mind. It's not designed to keep you poor if you got divorced.
I mean, Scott is a really great example of that, right? Like she was there for the building of Amazon.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not like she married 200 and whatever $1 billion net worth he is now, Jeff Bezos. You know, she married a different Jeff Bezos, and she definitely would have poured a lot of her life, her time, her whatever sacrifice, right, into that business. And I think it's interesting because I know that when that split happened and she immediately became the richest woman in the world because of the asset split, I think it's really interesting because there was a lot of controversial opinions about that. And I'm like, this one seems the least controversial to me. I think it would be different if Mackenzie Bezos had nothing and married, a multi-hundred billionaire, right?
And by the way, a prenup would have not really done anything for the Bezoses because they didn't have any wealth when they got married, right?
Right.
All that wealth was accumulated during their marriage. So, this is the interesting thing about the prenup is that it's designed if you have family wealth, if you have your own wealth, your business, or you know what I mean? So that's really, what it's supposed to do. But it is a really important thing for everyone to think about before they embark on the marriage journey.
Do you think that there's anyone who shouldn't sign a prenup?
I mean, yes. I think if it's explicitly unfair to you, then yes. I mean, that's why you have your own attorney.
Right.
Right. That's the whole reason why everyone has to have their own attorney. So you've got to get a good attorney to make sure that they have your best interests.
Okay, so we are now coming up on the end of the show, and we end every week with a question that we ask all guests. And the question is, what person has inspired you to roar the loudest and why?
The person who is, I think this is an interesting, I think if you had asked me this question when I was working on Wall Street and had asked me this question now, I think my Wall Street answer would have been very different than my answer now, because what I've had to do in the last, I don't know how many years it's been, 7 or 8 years, is I've had to basically completely change my career. I've had to completely change the dynamics of our family. I went from making a lot of money to making virtually no money, and building this business and the hustle that is involved in building this business is just really intense. And I honestly, there's just no way I could have done this without my husband. And he is just him, he's the best. He's the best. And he's just he's such a good dude. And he's such a even guy. And he's such a great partner. He is so genuinely such a wonderful partner for me. And he allows me to do, not allows me and he gives me permission. That's clearly not the dynamic of our relationship. But by the nature of the way he is as a human, I just have the freedom in my life to do what I want to do. And I don't ever have to feel like I have to ask him permission or check in with him. Also, I have tons of male friends. So many male friends. And not once has he ever been jealous or questioned me going to weird dinners with men. He's just oh, cool, have fun. Say hi to Bob. And he's just
awesome.
Yeah, and it's interesting. He went skiing a few weeks ago with his buddies, and he was gone from Thursday to Tuesday. And I was like,
please come back.
Damn, that motherfucker does a lot. I mean, he does so much, and especially since COVID, where he no longer commutes and he's still working at home. Like, that guy makes the lunches every morning, and he grocery shops, and he brings the kids to school, and he walks the dog, and he does the laundry. I mean, he's just such an amazing human, and I do not tell him enough how great he is. So he has truly allowed me to build my business, be who I am every day, and he's just like the best.
And roar loudly.
I mean, truly.
Well, thank you so much, Kris, for being here. We've really, really thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And thank you all for listening and watching. Join us again for Women Who Roar.
And if you want us to answer your questions about finance, careers, and women in leadership, you can tweet at us at Ask MoneyLion to be featured on the podcast.